Okay, good evening. I would like to call to order the July 27, 2020 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that all board members are present and participating remotely. All meeting participants will also be joining this meeting remotely in alignment with the current proclamation issued by Governor Inslee. This board meeting will be live streamed and viewable on the district website. If you are unable to live stream this meeting, or if you were unable to live stream it, you can either call in to 425-936-2805 or 425-936-2809, conference ID 4711683. And I believe that that's the same dial-in information and conference ID we've had for each meeting. Regular board meetings will continue to be live.
We lost him.
And I will now entertain a motion to approve the July 27 agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved by Director Carlson and seconded by Director Bleasner that we approve the agenda. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. The next item on our agenda is public comment. And due to coronavirus, all board meetings are being held remotely. And so there will be no in-person public comment to ensure social distancing. All public comment should be submitted in writing to Diane Jenkins at djenkins@lwsd.org by 3 p.m. on the date of the board meeting. At this time, the board members and I will read a selection of the public comment that we received tonight, as well as we will summarize those items that we're not able to get to tonight. We received, by my count, 22 submissions tonight for public comment. The first public comment that I will read tonight is from, and I apologize if I do not get the name correct, Roni Matakali, an Eastlake High School student. And she wrote to us, I am a student at Eastlake High School. I am emailing today to bring more attention to the issues of racism throughout our district. As a student whose race does not make me feel disrespected or undervalued in my place of education, it is extremely heartbreaking to see Black and other colored communities face these problems daily without interference from the district. This problem of racism within our school is often dismissed because it isn't physically seen, but it is profoundly felt in this environment of ignorance towards racism. In Eastlake High School in particular, without stating individuals' names, there have been many incidents where privileged students have used racially offensive slurs or racially motivated hateful actions. This environment in schools where it has become a normal event to use these hateful words and actions is due to the complacency of our administration in dealing with these issues. I've never felt that I could report these problems to principals because they do not address these actions with clear consequences. Also, students have repeatedly disrespected the Black community are still representing our school through ASB and leadership roles, which endorses the idea that these actions are harmless. Eastlake High School and other schools need to create change now. This includes clearly stating that those actions won't be tolerated with no exceptions and real consequences, creating a space for reporting problems with definite response from the administration, increasing representation of Black students and staff at all district levels, and creating incident reports and publishing how LWSD is taking real action. It is necessary that LWSD takes immediate steps to address and stand up for equal treatment for the colored communities. Thank you for your time. I hope that this statement can bring some insight about the perspectives of these problems from the experiences of a student. More importantly, I hope that serious action is taken after these meetings are held. Thank you for this opportunity to use our voices for positive change. And then Director Sage, would you read the next?
Sure. The next public comment is from Abby Hu, also a rising senior attending Eastlake High School. I'm disappointed that LWSD has not addressed the recent events of images and videos of LWSD students being blatantly racist and exuding unacceptable behavior. I'm disappointed that LWSD has failed to address the racism that exists within LWSD among the staff, teachers, and students. As an Asian student, specifically East Asian, it is demoralizing to see staff turn blind eyes to overt racism. Since middle school, I have learned to suppress all my experiences because I cannot trust that an adult, a staff member, will be there for me, to support me, to lift my voice and take action. It hurts to want to take action when you see something that doesn't sit right with you, but cannot because there is no one to tell, no one who will listen and take action. Why can you not help us of color? Is it because the aggressor is white and affluent? Are you uncomfortable? Is it because you are scared of backlash of parents? What is stopping you from taking action? I anticipate to see the following questions answered at future meetings. How will LWSD diversify their admins and staff? Expand training material. Is LWSD planning on hiring counselors of various backgrounds? All counselors at Eastlake High School are white. How will LWSD protect? Can someone give me the words for BIPOC? I apologize. I'm not sure exactly which words they stand for. So BIPOC and LGBTQIA plus students. How will LWSD reprimand unacceptable behavior? And no, telling a student, don't say that again, is equivalent to a slap on the wrist. It does nothing. I have attached a document with thoughts and experiences that students have anonymously submitted to me on racism and microaggressions in LWSD. I urge you all to read it in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Sage. And the board has also received a copy of the letter that was submitted by the student. Director Bleasner, would you read the next public comment?
Yes. So the next public comment is from Crystal Visperis, teacher at Eastlake High School. My name is Crystal Visperis, and I'm a 14th year teacher. This is my second year in Lake Washington School District. Thank you for genuinely listening to teachers and community members by reading survey results and public comments in regards to the racist Juanita mascot and announcing that we prioritize the lives of our students and teachers and staff members by starting next year as remote. These two issues are important and we still have more to tackle. First, I implore the school district to make direct action in actively seeking out and hiring more teachers of color and teachers with varied identities in regards to LGBTQ+, different abled bodies, religious affiliations, and experience in teaching brown and black children. I am one of 2 teachers of color in my humanities department, and I have been time and time again not listened to by my white colleagues or not taken seriously. This is demoralizing and hurtful. And if you want to attract and retain good teachers, educators must represent the reality of the world outside of Lake Washington School District. If we boast that our goals are to be anti-racist in our teaching practices, so must our hiring practices. Secondly, my colleagues and I wrote a letter to the school board and Dr. Stavum on June 1st to correct the community statement to include the word black and proudly proclaim Black Lives Matter. A second communication was sent to Dr. Stavum in urging her to apologize for the grave mistake of not centering Black people's lived experiences and protection of their lives by the violent hands of police. We have not heard follow-up on how this was taken into serious consideration. Dr. Holman, this is now on you. We have waited too long and we demand a response. The school board has not updated any resources since June 1st. This is a slap in the face to our Black students, teachers, and community members and cheapens the statement made months ago. We ask that you apologize for not including the word Black in the first statement to the community and consistently update the LWSD website and social media with your learnings on anti-bias and anti-racist school practices. Lastly, in the months of May and June, Gloria Henderson, your only Black administrator, emailed me several times, communicated with my colleagues, extended her support and advice, protested with other teachers in Redmond, and spent an hour and a half on a conference call with my students listening to their concerns and educating them on her experience as a Black educator. I absolutely commend Mrs. Henderson for all the effort and work she does behind the scenes of an all-white school board. I demand her salary is increased for the 2020-2021 school year. Thank you.
We were just going to read 3, but we're within the time that we normally have for public comment. So we received one additional public comment on inclusion and equity from Sheila Hodgins. Would another board member be willing to read that aloud? If not, I'm able to do it.
Who?
Apologies, it's not right under the one that we just
okay.
read, so I've lost track of it. If you could read that, I'd appreciate it.
That's okay. I will read it aloud.
Sheila Hodgins?
Yes. Mark, do you have that?
Yes, I do. I've got it right up here.
Could you please read
I get the easy name pronounced. Charlotte Hodgins, and I'm an educator at Eastlake High School. I'm writing to you again in support of the demands made by the LWEA Executive Committee regarding racial equity and policy action to combat and dismantle systemic racial oppression. As one of the top school districts in the state, we have the possibility to truly lead equitably. This means equity is at the forefront of everything we do. If we are to lead with equity, we must center voices consistently denied, specifically Black voices. In the letter my colleagues and I wrote to Dr. Stavum in June, we shared that the decision not to center Black voices in her statement about the protests was heard loud and clear. Following the letter, we've been hoping for a change, and that Black voices would be centered. This has still not happened. I want to give a direct example of what I mean by leading with equity. When families go to LWSD webpage, they see return to school updates, free meal for kids, community resources, and wellness. In all but one resource box, return to school updates, there is one guiding principle to, quote, proactively address the inequalities related to race, ability, socioeconomic status, and language that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, end quote. There is no conversation on race. There are no acknowledgments to Black students, families, staff members, and community members. Why does wellness not specifically discuss the current civil rights movement at hand? Where is the support or even acknowledgement of the pain, confusion, anger of our Black students in the wake of these protests, police brutality, and loss of life? If, quote unquote, emotional wellness is one of the factors, why is it that wellness, quote unquote, blanketed for all students? Why does, quote unquote, community resources, end quote, come under, quote, general, and have no information about the protests? How families can talk about police brutality, how families can talk about Breonna Taylor, how families can talk about race. This is crucial. This is happening right now. The conversation deserves attention. It deserves visibility. If we are to lead with equity, it has to be in everything we do. It is not meant to be cornered into a few trainings or a statement from the board over a month ago. It should not be discussed consistently because of comments at the board meetings, but led by the district. This is just one example, but considering it is the first thing that families see, it is what we are choosing to present. Commitment to equity is in every single communication. It is always visible. It is a reminder that this is important. End of letter.
Thank you, Director Stewart. In addition to the comments we just read aloud, the board received 16 submissions from parents, community members, and teachers expressing concern about the district's consideration to resume in-person learning in the fall. Many of those predated the decision to do remote learning in the fall that occurred last week. In addition, we received one public comment from a parent expressing disappointment of the district's decision for having remote learning rather than a hybrid approach that was being considered. And then finally, we received one public comment from a teacher expressing concern about the limitations of the Microsoft Teams platform. I will not read all of those aloud tonight, but the board has received all of them in writing and has reviewed them. And thank you all who took the time to submit public comment to us. The next item on our agenda is the approval of the July 27 consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda. Oh, Director Carlson, I see your hand went up. Is that about this or something else?
Actually,
Sure.
it was about two things. First, I wanted to say a huge thank you to our student Debbie, who her comment is useful, but what is most useful for me is reading through the collected stories to support that from our students. She had more than 20 examples. It helps us understand, or helps me understand, what she means when she's talking about a culture that is hostile. That is endlessly useful to me. The other thing is I wanted to come clean that I am, Director Sage is not the only one who would not have known off the cuff what BIPOC stands for. The people of color we are familiar with. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous People of Color. And the best definition I was able to find while she was talking is that it's meant to unite all people of color in the work for liberation while intentionally acknowledging that not all people of color face the same levels of prejudice. So Black, Indigenous People of Color, and you're not alone. I would have stumbled there myself.
I remembered what it was, but I didn't remember that I was Indigenous.
Yes.
So, my mistake.
Difference between meaning and knowing what it stands for. So, thanks.
Thank you, Director Carlson. I will concede I also did not know what it stood for. So thank you. So the next item on our agenda tonight is the approval of the July 27 consent agenda, and I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move approval.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Carlson and seconded by Director Feliesner that we approve the consent agenda. Dr. Holman, will you please poll the board?
Yes. Director Sage,
Yes.
Director Bleesner,
Yes.
Director Carlson,
Yes.
Vice President Stewart,
Yes.
President LaLiberty.
Yes. Dr. Holman, will you please summarize the donations?
Absolutely. Particularly in these times, given economic conditions, how remarkable is it that we continue to receive donations from our community? Our PTSA has donations totaling nearly $18,000, and from private sources, about $15,000. So we just want to thank our community and private sponsors for for continuing to provide that financial support as we work towards reopening school in the fall.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. The first item on the non-consent agenda is an update to the fall planning for the reopening of schools. Dr. Holman, would you please provide the board with the update?
Yeah, and just one thing before we move forward, I just want to let the board know that we're having a technical difficulty with our call-in feature tonight, and so we tried to remedy that, but we were not able to get our call-in feature to work, and so those that previously called in would have to watch this after the board meeting. So I just wanted to let you know that that was occurring this evening. Okay?
Thank you.
Yes, and so with that, we do have a presentation of our return to school task force work. As we talked about at our last meeting, we have a number of different topics that we wanted to cover tonight, so let me go ahead and share my screen. And as the board knows, a lot has happened since our last presentation to you about our work, but that doesn't mean that our workload gets any lighter. A significant amount of work to prepare for the upcoming school year. I just want to provide a few introductory slides as we talk about this tonight. The topics we want to cover tonight, like we talked about at our last meeting: childcare, technology and information services, and then an update on mental health supports as well. I shared this with the community on Thursday night when we did announce that we would be moving to full remote. And this is just a statement that continually reminds us that our work about planning for the 2021 school year is all about planning so that students will have the ideal learning experience that they can given the conditions, and that we have to be prepared to be able to pivot, shift our plans depending on those conditions. Our goal in all of this is to have our students learning from their teachers in in-person instruction. And so we have an urgency as an organization to get to that point. And we know that given current health conditions, that is not the reality that we're facing. But it's an important reminder to the community that we don't go to remote learning because that's our first choice. Our first choice is to be with students in person, providing them with those experiences that we know are best in person. And we know, given the current health conditions, that just isn't that's not available right now to be able to start the 2021 school year. Everything we're doing in our return to task force work is about accomplishing our mission of preparing each and every student to graduate. And that means as we are continuing to develop our remote learning experience for students, it's with this in mind, because we want to make sure that students are continuing to march along that journey towards graduation, whether they're an incoming kindergartner and their first day of kindergarten is going to be remote, or it's the last first day of K-12 school for a student, knowing that they're a senior in high school. Regardless of where they are in their journey, it's about preparing them to be able to do that, and also to be prepared for their next steps in life, with our vision of every student being future ready to be able to make decisions about, do they want to go to college, go into the global workplace, and also we want all of our students to continually be prepared for their own personal success. It's a good reminder to know that we do have guiding principles that are guiding all of the work that we are doing. I know you've seen these before. And we also have goals that help support each and every decision that we make. And it's critical that all of the teams that are working on this right now are focused on these guiding principles and these goals as they do their work. So our first update tonight is regarding childcare. You heard me Thursday night talk about that's an area that we are going to work with community partners. So Associate Superintendent Barbara Posthumus is going to join us to give that update. As a reminder for the board, the connection to policy here for the board is really OE9, that communication and engagement with the community. And I think it really lands within 9.3 about developing connections and strategic partnerships throughout the larger community, focused on understanding and contributing to the district's efforts to help all students achieve defined district results. When you think about our focus on childcare, it's really about providing that right level of support so that students can have the care they need, but also a space for them to continue their learning. And with that, I'll invite Associate Superintendent Barbara Posthumus to join, and I will give her access to
All right, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
So I'm just checking to see if the slide is moving, and it's not yet.
There it is.
There we go. Okay, so I want to share a little bit of information about what we're doing around childcare and planning for fall, but I first want to share kind of what has happened since this spring. When we closed our schools in March, we worked closely with our community partners. We have partnerships with the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, and we work closely with them to provide childcare for our essential workers, our healthcare workers, and our first responders. And we did a survey as we were planning, and we had over families expressing the need for care for over 300 students at the time. Ultimately, I wanted to share that, and care was provided at the YMCA. They provided care at their locations in Bellevue and Sammamish, and the Boys and Girls Club provided care at their locations in Kirkland and Sammamish. overall, they served 37 students from our district at their locations during the March through June timeframe. So the other thing then, as we moved into summertime, the stay-at-home order was lifted. We moved into summertime. They changed into a summer camp model, and the health department relaxed some of the, expanded the number of students that could be served per staff member. And so they reached out to us and asked to expand into our district facilities for their summer camps, which of course we did. And so you can see from this list, they used 5 of our elementary school locations. They served over 170 students, and they made sure that they had small groups. You can see there was about no more than 45 students at each location, about 30 to 40 students. They spread them out over multiple spaces so that they had about a 1 to 10 ratio, or no more than 10 staff, including staff, in each area. They also made sure, the parent drop-off and pickup happened outside, so parents were not allowed in the building, only the children. They did temperature checks, daily temperature checks of staff and students. They did regular cleanings, both the staff and then our custodians came in the evening and cleaned each morning and each evening. And then they kept students and the staff in the same cohort. So the same 9 students were within the same staff member every day, and they did not mix groups or things like that. So that's what's been happening this summer, and it's been going very well. So I just wanted to share our current model. During a typical school year, we have before and after school in each of our elementary school locations. We have 29 elementary schools. Our YMCA serves 12 schools. Our Boys and Girls Club serves about 4 locations, and then our internal district extended day program also serves 12 sites. And then at Juanita Elementary, our Juanita Schools Foundation provides care there. So in a typical school year, we're able to serve over 1,600 students during the year. So what we're doing for fall is that the YMCA and Boys and Girls Clubs right now are evaluating their models for fall. And what I mean by that is normally they charge a monthly fee for before and after school care. Well, they may need to look at their models, and it may need to be a weekly fee, something in less than a monthly time frame, just given the changing environment. They also are, following the Department of Health rules. The rules do allow up to 22 individuals per space. So you can have, that includes adults and students. So in our large spaces, you can actually divide that up to 2 groups. So you can have one set of 22 students on one side of the gym and 22 students on the other side of the gym. At this time, though, the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club are sticking with kind of a 1-to-9, 1-to-12 student ratio. Our extended day program typically in a typical year has a 1-to-18 student ratio. Our district right now is conducting a survey of all our staff to gauge interest and need for childcare. And so right now the survey closes at the end of this week, but through the 25th, we receive responses from over 1,700 staff, and at this time it's showing the need for care for approximately 230 elementary school children of our staff. So what we're doing, we are working with each of our community partners. They're right now evaluating our square footage in our gym and commons and other spaces to determine maximum capacity. At this time, their goal is about 60 to 80 students per site to maximize efficiencies. As I said, in the summertime, they're kind of in the 40 to 50 range. They're also working on their registration process and timeline. Our programs had already, right before the closure in March, they had already registered families for the this this fall. And so, and of course, when they registered that was a before and after school model. So because things have changed, they're going to have to go through a new registration process. So, and then as I mentioned, they're working on their program model and their fees. And then, so then the next slide, yes. So we hope to get registration up on our website in early August, and begin the registration process with 4 to 6 sites per provider. So we'll make sure to have in each of our learning areas, we'll have available locations for childcare, and then as demand warrants, we'll expand to additional locations. So any questions?
Director Sage, you want to go first?
Sure. So what happens in the scenario of, okay, let's say K through 3 is on site at a school in childcare, but then we think we can reopen kindergarten because there's such low numbers. What happens in that scenario?
So we will be adjusting. We will have to, flex and adjust as we bring more students back onto campus, as we're able to, serve students. So we'll be looking at, we may have to move then to a before and after school care. We may have to move into different spaces and serve those families. So we'll be working on those scenarios.
Different spaces being not on-site at school for?
No, we may, for example, the Commons is a space we don't normally do care during the day, but we may have to have students eat in their classrooms so that we can use the Commons for childcare. Would be an example of that.
Mm-hmm. I guess the underlying point for me is to make certain that yes, we can provide childcare now, but the goal, like Dr. Holman had said, was in-person learning as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think Director Stewart and then Director Bleasner.
Barbara, this model that you've got here, that basically enables you to, or enables us rather, to do in-person special needs classes?
Yes, because we intend to use, again, the gym and commons and potentially the shared learning areas. And so we, at this time, would not be, going into classrooms, or if we did go into classrooms, it would be a limited number of classrooms, and we would not need the same classrooms that the special needs population would be using.
Okay, but Mike, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear, but the parents of the special needs kids should know that they'll be starting in building education for the fall?
Shannon Hitch is working on that, and so I can't speak to special education services right now.
Sorry, I just wasn't clear if what you're talking about was a combination of it. So thank you, Barbara.
Okay.
I think it's my turn. Thank you for your work on this. Not easy.
You're welcome.
So one of the questions as you think about childcare, there were sort of 3 things that I thought about. One was, are we communicating with businesses and speaking to them about potential of thinking of family-friendly policies? Are there things that they can do to help facilitate families who have kids to have more flexible schedules, to shift those things, to potentially be able to support from there and be able to hold that conversation? I don't think we can expect, I think we need to approach this from a community perspective. So I just think that's a piece we should be thinking about, of how can businesses also help support this component? As Director Sage mentioned, just in regards to as we move to different models through this, thinking completely about what happens with that and knowing what those steps are as you phase things in, I think will be really important. I will say I have concerns of putting 22 kids in a classroom. I understand that DOH has that guideline from a space piece, but I think the idea of cohorting made sense. The other question I would ask is, in those summer childcare programs that we had, did we have any cases known of COVID amongst staff or kids?
So the YMCA and Boys and Girls Club during the May through June school closure has actually been doing phenomenally well. I don't have statistics of how many cases they've had. I believe we did, and I'd have to go back and look, I believe we did have one staff member case in the summer, and it was dealt with by the Department of Health in that all we did was quarantine that cohort of 9 students and staff member. The program was not closed. So it actually went very well when there was a case because they had kept everybody separate. So.
And that's a great example, just in that sense of that cohorting just limits contacts when that happens. Having the community transmission that we do, you can expect that to happen at some point. It won't be a surprise. And so knowing what our steps are, is beneficial. So highlighting that cohorting piece is vital to really make sure we are thinking about that at all times. Entrance across the board. Family-friendly practices and the play out with that. That's it. Go ahead.
I want to comment just on your community. Yeah, this is a community, everybody needs to band together. I also want to make sure to let you know that we're also talking with the city of Kirkland and the city of Redmond to see what resources they can also provide as they're working on their community programs.
Absolutely.
And
community centers would be an option that be considered. If they're not able to open those, we could access into those as well. Parks and Recs we used to partner with, that's always a component. So that's great. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Director Sage, do you have something else to add?
No, I apparently just like my hand up.
Okay, got it. I do not have any questions. Director Carlson, do you have any questions? Okay, hearing none.
It looks like Mark may have a question.
Oh, sorry. Director Stewart.
No problem. To echo what Sherry was saying, that working with our especially our large corporate neighbors, if you will, within our communities, I think I brought that up in a comment about, if not the last meeting in June, the first July meeting, the idea that we try and work together with those large organizations to have them modify, if at all possible, or look to see where we can help and they can help in the placement of students, or to have more friendly work at home models. I know that some of the folks like Google put all their employees at home for the rest of the year. But anyway, if there's, if we just reach out to those corporations to say, look, we want to make your work as easy as possible for your employees, and we want to make our students as safe and as healthy as we can by virtue of how to provide an education that will be conducive for your employees. I just think if we have an organized outreach, I think that'd be great.
Thank you.
I have just one other question, if I could. Sorry, Director Liberty, I didn't give you the opportunity to call on me.
That's fine.
In regards to
I put your hand down accidentally.
Okay.
So.
In regards to cost for the child care, are families expected to pay? Is there options of a sliding fee? Are there scholarships available to cover it? I'm just thinking that this is an additional expense that often schools, and knowing that we are dealing with an economic downturn in many ways for many families, how are we dealing with that component?
Yeah, so our the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club, and we do have they have varying fees, and again they're working on their program model, so they haven't come out yet with what the model is and what the fee structure is. And both the Y and the Boys and Girls Club have applications for if you need financial assistance. They have the opportunity for that, and so we'll continue to work with them on ensuring that that is communicated and available.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from any board members?
All of my questions have been covered.
Dr. Holman, is there anything else on the return to school update?
Yes, there is. We have 2 more pieces of our update this evening. And our next presentation is our Technology and Information Services update. And tonight you will hear from 3 of our directors, our Director of Technology Integration, Mindy Mallon, our Director of Data Research and Accountability, Tim Krieger, and 7 days in the district, you will meet our new Director of Technology Operations, Forrest Baker, is here to talk tonight about some of our devices and hotspot work that we are doing. And so with that, I just want to remind the board that this too ties to board policy within OE 13, about 13.2, providing a comprehensive and functional technology infrastructure that addresses needs of all staff, students, and community. I can't stress enough the importance of our technology team as we move to a remote model, knowing that all 30,000 plus students and 4,000 plus staff really are all interconnected by our infrastructure. But it's also 13.3, providing easily accessible, relevant, and current data to appropriate users to direct school and instructional improvement planning. And Director Krieger will talk a little bit about that. And first with us is Director Mallon, and we'll talk to you about technology integration.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you again. So one of the primary challenges expressed by internal and external stakeholders last spring was the use of multiple platforms and the challenges that created. So in order for us to ensure that we can deliver quality instruction as we move into this period of remote learning, we are going to one single student learning management system, which will be Classroom Teams. Hang on, John, I'm going to see if I can get control here. I'll let you click if it's not working. Do I need to give control back to you? Oh, here we go. So our whole purpose is to make sure that we can have a platform that we can provide quality, consistent instruction with clear expectations and accountability for assignments, assessments. So that's why we're making this shift. And in order to make that shift, we needed to make some adjustments to support the transition. So one was the adjustment in our calendar, and the other was the adjusted time in August to secure time for teachers to participate in classroom team trainings. We are very fortunate to have a collaborative and strong relationship with the LWEA, and it was a result of those negotiations that we entered into a letter of understanding that modifies our school calendar. And so I want to share with you just what that calendar looks like. So, and I think you've seen this, but the last day of school will be June 16th, and this is one day earlier than previously planned. And the May 28th leap day will become a student day, and all staff will report to work that day instead of June 17th. All our LWEA members will work the leap hours previously designated for May during the August 2020 training hours, and members will end their workday on 3 designated Wednesday leap days during the year, which are still to be determined. So what this does is it provides a balance of hours for us in terms of the time that teachers are working. And what this does is it gives us a set of time that teachers will then engage in professional learning in August. So we adjusted our August calendar. John, I'm not getting it to move. I don't know if you can still. Okay, so we adjusted our LEAP calendar. So there will be 4 hours of required classroom teams training, and those will be completed between a span of period of time. So our LEAP generally does not start until the end of August. So now teachers will have some time starting on the 10th, between the 10th and the 21st, to complete these trainings. It'll be done asynchronously. We've also moved some of our required trainings. These are our annual mandatory trainings, and so there will be 5.5 hours that they will be spent doing some of our mandatory trainings. These used to be done in person, and now these will also be done asynchronously, and these will be recorded inside Cornerstone. We also have 2 additional hours that will be focused on remote teaching and learning. And really the idea is learning more about what does remote teaching look like and include, and then how does that apply to the setup of our teams' classrooms for our teachers. So if we ask the question, what does Classroom Teams instructional platform provide for us? John, if you don't mind going back, there's something funky here in this one. Yeah, so are we both controlling? Yes, click there. Here we go. So it supports quality instructional delivery for in-person, hybrid, and remote models. And this will be really important for us as we move into the 2020 school year, as we could move in and out of these models. It allows for both synchronous and asynchronous learning. It has that video lesson and communication option. There's embedded collaboration, engagement, and assessment features for our students and our teachers. There's an ease of storage of access to resources, and then one of the most important features is that embedded accessibility tools, so that students who require a different language, students who require a different font, students who require the text to be read out loud have that right within the platform, and they're not going outside that to get the support to do that. It also allows for a streamlining of digital applications. So we have worked very closely with Microsoft to integrate some of our core instructional technologies. So now our Smart Learning Suite, which is another resource that we use to develop lessons, is embedded right within the WeSpace. That just happened this August. All of our Office 365 applications are embedded, so Forms, OneNote, the class notebook, Discovery Education is another one of our third-party tools. All of these are embedded so that everyone is working within one space, which just makes it much easier. It creates that ease of access for the different resources, and then also a consistent experience, which is really important for really all of our stakeholders. I mentioned that ease of transition between models, so no matter which environment we're working within, teachers continue their instructional practice and instructional delivery within the classroom team format or platform. It allows for consistent communication for students and families, and it's an improved strategy for engaging our parents and our students in learning, which we heard a lot about last year. So there's many different ways that we are going about supporting our staff. We talked a little bit about the August professional learning. We know that we are going to need to provide ongoing professional learning opportunities for our staff. This is just the beginning of our work together. And so, let me see if I can go back. So we're jumping ahead. But anyway, let's go back to our support for staff. So our support for staff, we will be providing webinars specific to different group types. So we're thinking about our classroom teachers, we're thinking about our substitutes who will be coming in to support teachers when teachers need to be out ill for some reason. We are thinking about how do we support our instructional staff, and in order for this to all work smoothly, every one of those groups will need to have a very solid understanding of how classroom team works so that they can ease in and out of it and provide access to those people who need to be supporting to keep that learning moving forward. We will also continue with our technology integration facilitator program. So remember, those are our facilitators who work at the building level to support and provide additional training for teachers. And so we'll be building up the skills in our facilitators, who will then be delivering instruction to small groups, large groups within the structure of the LEAP time for the buildings. Probably one of our features that is most important or supports for staff is our Classroom Teams Handbook, and that calls out what are the how are we going to make sure that we are being consistent as we move forward to support all the different stakeholders and make sure that all of our systems are aligning so that we're all turning on classroom teams at the same time, that we are making sure that there is a posting for when assignments are there, that there's a landing page within our classroom OneNotes, the embedded classroom team OneNotes, so that parents have an understanding. They know exactly where to go to find out information about their teacher and how the class is set up, as well as the learning plans or menus that the elementary and secondary teaching and learning task force has been working on. For our students, we are now going to be providing that centralized access to resources, so a standard format, those embedded accessibility tools again, consistent communication avenues. So again, we're trying to keep our students housed in their work within one place so that they're not having to have to go to a lot of different places. It will not capture all of this, but it's going to cover a great deal of that instructional work. The other thing about classroom teams and what it provides is a range of engagement options. So that means in a remote environment, we could engage visually, we could engage auditorily. A teacher, if they're giving feedback, could take a quick audio or video recording of themselves giving feedback. We know that the more often that we can show students the face of their teacher and engage with students in a more personal way, the better the learning environment will be and the more connection we'll have with our kids. And then lastly, of course, that our district is working to provide district laptops for each of our students so that this remote learning can continue. So in terms of supporting our guardians, it's very similar, standardized location of instructional resources, consistent communication strategy. Right now, we are working to fine-tune. There are different ways that parents have access to resources within class teams. One of the ways is that within the embedded class notebook in the content library, teachers provide a link, and it is a read-only link to parents. And what that does is it provides that glimpse into the classroom that PowerSchool Learning also provided. This is where a teacher stores their content. And then also we are looking at the Guardian Digest, and the Guardian Digest provides the opportunity for parents to be notified in one email of all the different student assignments and when those assignments are turned in. So we are working very closely with Data Research and Accountability, Tim, and Technology Operations with Forest team to make sure that we are looking at how Skyward and class teams integrates and make sure that we're not creating unforeseen struggles or challenges in the future. For our guardians, we are also in the process of developing tutorials and access documents. So we know that the video tutorials worked well for our parents last year in terms of helping them gain access to some of the digital resources. And so what we would like to be able to do is provide the tutorials in different languages. We would like to be able to give our parents a view into the classroom, so almost a walkthrough of what a classroom team site looks like, and then how do they access that content library? How does the assignment feature work if we are in fact able to launch that right away? And we're also thinking about providing webinars for families, so similar like we would do like a live meeting, that it gives us an opportunity to connect personally with our parents who may want a live walkthrough of the resource and how it is set up. We also know that Teaching and Learning is also working to provide some tutorials based on the level. So at the elementary level, they're working just to make sure that parents understand how the learning plans will be set up. Our professional learning plan. Are you able to make it shift, John? Okay, we'll jump here first. So I wanted to bring up a couple of things. One of the beauty of our relationship with Microsoft is that they have been a huge asset for us in just really supporting this work of moving into class teams in the spring and now as we move forward. And so we are in a group called the TAP group, which basically gives us access to all the changes as they come up. So we're not waiting on those. And so we know those changes when they're coming up, and we have the ability to get in and practice and utilize those far earlier than some of our other colleagues. And so some of the things we know that are coming up is in the past with the meeting attendance features, and this is something that we're also working with Tim on, is that the teacher could get a list of who attended a meeting, but if they left the meeting, they would no longer have access to that data. And so coming out in July, which is coming upon us very soon, the information will stay so that the teacher then could print out, and it would also show when were students coming in and out of the class session. We have gone to large gallery view for staff, and we're hoping that we can also do that for students. What that does is puts all the students of the class inside seats, and so it takes out all the background visuals or siblings who may be popping in, which just makes it easier to manage. And then probably one of our most important features that we're looking towards is the virtual breakout rooms, and those are anticipated for the end of the third quarter, which will be end of September. And we know that this is a critical feature in the remote learning environment, so that will require some training for teachers as we move forward. And so we will wait for that rather than have a workaround, because we know that there can be challenges in terms of student privacy when we don't follow the really specific guidelines that are set up within each of these features. And then the last slide is just around professional learning, and basically just to let you know that we are thinking about professional learning for all the different groups, for our teachers, as we mentioned, for how we're going to support our administrators. We've got the Guardian training that we talked about, and then all our different instructional groups that support teaching and learning during the school day. And that was all I had for you tonight.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Does anyone else have any questions? Looks like Director Sage is my hand raised.
Yeah, I see.
I guess I'll go first. What is a virtual breakout room, and how is it used by teachers?
So what a virtual breakout room would do is it would allow a teacher to divide students into groups in a virtual environment. And what it allows also is that they are a part of that meeting. So the challenge that we have right now is we have no way for a teacher to pop in and out easily to monitor these breakout groups per se. And so that becomes one of our responsibilities under student online protection laws, is that we cannot put kids into an environment where we're not moderating it. So it puts the teacher in control of the meetings and she is in control, he is in control of start and end times, can keep track of what is being said in meetings. And so it's a really valuable way to actually keep our kids engaged. We were really thinking this was going to be critical when we were looking at a hybrid model, because we were looking at different ways we could engage kids at home as well as kids in school, so that we were keeping a connection. And so this is one of the ways that we can do this. So it's that whole social piece and collaborative piece that we want to make sure that we're including within our instruction. So Director Sage, did you have a question?
Well, a compliment, first of all. You know how when you're involved and working in one school district, you keep hearing how everything's better at a different school district, so why don't you do that? Does that ever happen to you?
Oh, yeah.
So what you just described is like everything some other school district did all bundled into one, and we're rolling it all out. And so I'm super excited to see all these different aspects of remote learning, especially the virtual breakout. Yeah. I've actually been participating in a group that does those virtual breakouts. Extremely helpful when you have a prompt, you break out into, say, 5 people, you hash through it and what it relates to your particular area of work, you come back, you're able to share it as a whole. Yeah. It's a phenomenal tool to keep everybody engaged on a Zoom call, basically, and I'm very excited to see all of these options.
Yes, we are too. Thank you. Was there another question?
Yes, my hand is up. This is Siri.
Hi, Siri.
Hi. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the work that's going into this. A question I have, and it's somewhat about the virtual breakout rooms as well. Recognizing the value behind it. I actually admit I'm a little concerned that we're not seeing it until the end of September potentially. And I don't know if there's capacity to move that or to push it forward. That is such a key thing in that remote environment to be able to do that. So I guess I would highly see, if there's any way to push it forward earlier, it would be a key thing for people to be able to have.
Yes, and I want to be really clear. If we had it today, we would be having it out there. So this is really Microsoft's end, not our end, to having that feature available. And I will definitely reinforce that this is believed to be an extremely important feature by our board, and as much as possible, that we need to have it out there as soon as possible. And we do connect with them regularly.
That's great. And say it's not just for the board, it would be for our community and our children and our students and our families to have a positive learning environment, which would benefit them greatly.
Absolutely.
In their home turf. So the other question that I would ask is there a possibility for us to see Microsoft Classroom Teams and to somewhat see how it plays out? So I hear a lot, I'm on Teams a lot through a lot of different places, and you speak of Classroom Teams, which appears different to me. And so I do think I would love to have just an opportunity to see it in action to better understand it. I don't know if any other board members would be interested, but.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Yeah, just to walk through. I think one of the challenges that we have right now is that we do have some summer school classes, and really it's because we have not had this in play before. We don't have what's a typical classroom really look like? But we can definitely get some exemplars from some of our NCE cohorts we've been working with.
So if I'm understanding, is Microsoft basically creating a learning management system in general for lots of people to use, or is this specific that we're working with them in order to create?
So within Teams, there are different types of teams that you can create. So you can create a staff team, you can create a class team, you can create what's called a PCC team, professional collaboration communication team, and so and then there's just a generic type of team. And so within those features, or within those types of teams, it allows for specific types of features. So for example, in the class team, it has an embedded class notebook. So it's built into the notebook, so a teacher doesn't have to go outside of Teams, they work within there. And so when a class is rostered for a teacher, then what that also provides is in a class notebook, every child has an individual section. So that individual section is automatically generated for the teacher. And so that means it's all housed in one place. So nobody can see that individual student section that is just for the student to see. And so that's where the teacher would engage with the student to potentially give feedback or to push assignments out to a student. It also has a files section, which are not in some of our other notebooks, which is a read-only file. And so that's where a teacher would put information for students to access that for just that reason. You don't want anything to happen to the document, the content that's being placed there. It also has the parent guardian feature, which is and an assignment feature. So teachers post assignments within the classroom team site. That assignment then will be posted out in the post for that child. So the child will see all of their assignments on the left-hand side of a class team. They will also get it in the post section, and then the parent guardian digest. The way that works is that as the assignments are posted, the parents get a weekly notification that an assignment has been posted, and they will also get a notification if the assignment has been turned in. So I just want to caution that this is something that we're working really closely with data research and accountability to make sure it's going to work the way we want it to. And we believe that it is a really good quality feature, and this is a way that we can get consistency. And so we're just working through all of those different aspects and how it connects with Skyward to make sure that it's going to work the way we want it to and be as beneficial as we want it to. So those are just a few of the features. In many ways, it works really similarly. I would say the other advantage to having the class team is that it has a built-in channel or place where videos are stored on stream for that class. And so students would only have access to that channel, and the only people who would be able to look at that particular video related to that class would be the student with their student login. So those are just a few of kind of the main features.
Mindy, I want to jump in real quick and to answer Siri's question. That's a great description of the features, and this is a tool that Microsoft is building out right now as a learning management system. And so
Yes.
it isn't being designed specifically for us, but it is part of our Office 365 suite that we have as a district.
And with that will come other challenges. So recognize, though, it's important to be able to put that out. So even because there's some flexibility that will come with that, there's some bugs, there's some things out of our control. And so that's a choice that's made when you're choosing a learning management system in the process of being developed. So
Right.
just sort of for full transparency on things like that, having been involved with some of those.
Yep.
Cassandra, did you have another question?
I did, really quickly, the webinars for parents, and I know this becomes a communication issue. Making sure that, we try and reach parents in different languages and different life circumstances in many ways so that they know where to go to get access to those webinars. And I think I may have mentioned the WhatsApp a couple meetings ago. Other districts are exploring that because apparently it's more commonly used around the world than it is in the US, but people who live here use it to talk to their home country. So not sure if that would help if we were able to access a platform like that. But this is a great start to remote learning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. And with that, we'll transition to Director Krieger. And Tim, you have run of the show, so it's all yours.
Perfect, thanks. I'm just looking for the arrows. There we go. Oh, it's just super delayed. Okay. Good afternoon. I wanted to share some of the priorities and focus that the Data Research and Accountability Department is working on right now. First, we've had a priority of summer data collection and analysis with a goal to provide accurate and understandable data to the departments as quick as possible. So I'm just sharing 4 examples of some data we've been collecting. We had the parent return to school survey, we had our staff return to school survey, we had the fully remote enrollment process, and then the staff intent to return to work. And as a department, what we're doing is we're trying to gather that data and turn around in real time back to our decision makers to help them understand what is the state of the state and be able to make decisions based on that data. Another thing that we're working on right now is, I'm going to call it the Skyward rebuilds, and it doesn't mean that we're rebuilding the actual software. It's just we're trying to figure out is how do we adjust the settings within our student and employee information system to meet the needs of a rapidly changing environment. Some examples of what we're doing, we did build out the framework for a fully remote and hybrid program that would allow us to basically pull students out temporarily to a fully remote program while leaving them in their neighborhood school and keeping the master schedule intact. We have to shelve that obviously right now, but we now have all of that ready to go if needed. We're really using the system in new ways to support online processes. So for example, this past June, we collected all teacher contracts electronically through Skyward. In the past, we had all 2,000 plus teachers submit contracts by paper 2 copies to HR, and then somebody had to go through those and mark them, and we were able to actually accomplish that all remotely, electronically, and we could run reports, and it saved hundreds of hours of time. So one of the benefits of this is that we're actually having to be smarter about some of the work that our systems do, some of the work that our system does. We are now trying to figure out how to take attendance in a both a legal and efficient way in a fully remote system. So what does that actually mean? We need to build new rules. So for example, if a student comes into a Teams meeting and they stay only partway through, how do we mark that on the attendance side? Is that a tardy? Is that an absence? So we're working through all those with some other groups to figure out the policy behind it and the technology behind it. We do have to make some adjustments to the gradebook for a remote environment. And while we do all these things, we need to ensure that we don't have unintended consequences for all the other systems. So Skyward basically has tentacles in everything. And if we change something like a course code or we modify the master schedule to sort of fit one need, it can have implications across the system. So we're trying to make sure that we don't do anything disastrous. A couple other pieces that we're working on is we're developing some new key metrics for evaluating our 2020-21 remote learning. I want to remind you that we had that board dashboard view last spring where we provided the weekly update on online activity, connectedness, meals served. Our intent is to do something very similar this year. But the metrics are going to be very different because we're going to be in a different environment. So some will be similar. Well, there'll probably be some kind of attendance like one. But some of the other metrics will be improved because we'll have more data. So our plan is to be rolling that out. And then lastly, we need to adjust our school and student data displays for our principals. Typically in August, we provide principals with data sets and visualizations for their incoming students. That includes data from the previous year, grade data, state assessments, attendance, discipline. A lot of that data is no longer there, and so we have new types of data like the spring online activity. So we're having to adjust our visualizations for principals to accommodate sort of this new type of data that's coming from the spring, and then some new data that we're going to be getting, whatever attendance system we develop, and then some new assessments we have. The FastBridge assessments will be incorporated into those visuals. So those are our 4 priorities that we're working on right now. So I can take any questions, or
we'll take Director Sage has her hand raised.
Hi, Tim. Thank you for that. Just wanted to double check your definition of adjusting gradebook. That does that mean because spring quarter we had such a different grading system, or does that relate to something else?
No. Okay, so 2 things. One, we will be moving more towards a grading system that looks similar to the past. What I mean by adjusting the gradebook is how do we, one, when assignments are made in teams, how does that roll over, or how do the 2 systems talk, or can we get them to talk? And 2, particularly in elementary, depending on how the elementary schedule looks, we may adjust like some of the reporting strands, specifically like in like some of the social studies or science, some things that might be reported first semester or second semester, or how we report them might be adjusted.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
I'm good. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, thanks, Tim.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay, and with that, we have our third presenter. I just want to introduce everyone. This is Forrest Baker, our new Director of Technology Operations, and he's here to share a little bit about some of our device information and an update on hotspots.
Thank you very much. And there we go. Thank you. So good evening. My name is Forrest Baker, and it's a pleasure to be here as the new Director of Technology Operations. So really just a brief update on a couple of items to our technology plan for going fully remote this coming school year. So we currently have an established one-to-one student-to-device technology standard within our middle and high schools to support teaching and learning, but not for our elementary schools. So I'd like to first provide an update for our K-5 student one-to-one devices. So the goal is to ensure that every student has a device for remote education. And in order to adapt and respond to this need over the summer, we have purchased an additional 2,000 Surface Gos and are also repurposing 5,300 laptops that are being turned in or returned from our 8th graders and seniors in order to meet this new one-to-one standard for our elementary students. And this will additional devices will provide us with the approximate 16,200 devices that we'll need for elementary students. There will be a delay in the rollout of our new devices, however. Given the current supply chain challenges, we will not be receiving some new devices until late September, but the vast majority of our elementary grade levels will be ready to start with devices. And then in addition, an update on mobile hotspots. So the goal here is, of the district, is that all students have internet access available to them at home in order to provide the essential connectivity for staying engaged academically and socially. And based on what we learned from last spring and the data we've collected in our parent survey, the number of hotspot devices we currently have will adequately cover the reported need in our community. So that concludes the technology operations update this evening. Thank you very much.
Director Carlson, you want to go first?
Well, I thank you for the update there, and pleased to meet you. The delayed rollout, can you go into a little bit more detail on what's going on there? I appreciate that there might be some of the devices that are being repurposed that are coming out in late September, but that doesn't mean we have any kids who won't have access, right?
So we are doing our darndest to get as many devices that are already available, coming back from summer school, coming back, well, we actually have a number in the warehouse that are also part of these repurposing devices, so we can be in that place to meet that 16,000 number. And that is in part due because we could not get a commitment on that, the Microsoft delivery for those Surface Gos any sooner than September 16th is what they would put into writing as the earliest. And typically they deliver before then, but that's what we have in writing, and so we wanted to have a backup plan.
I think the other piece to this one is knowing that we may offer devices to families, but there's going to be many, many families that choose to use their own devices at their house versus taking using one of the district provided laptops. And so
okay,
that's a good point too, because really our numbers include what we have on hand for repairs and replacements, and just knowing that we don't have 100% of our students checking those out.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
I think Director Sage and Director Belizner.
Just a quick question. Is there more demand for hotspots now than there was in the spring?
Well, I don't believe so. And we actually saw a lot of our hotspots getting checked out in the spring, from what I understand, and there really wasn't a use for it or a need for it. It was kind of a backup plan, and so we had a lot of them coming back just because they weren't getting used. And so now we have the same number moving forward, and we're basing really our projection based on the survey data feedback, and it's really coming in at about I think it was 1.2% of our families saying that they need internet connectivity.
Okay. And hopefully we'll follow up with kids via communication channels to ensure that those who had the most trouble accessing will be able to access. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dr. Blazner?
Welcome. Glad to have you on board.
Thank you.
And so then also with that, just in regards to a potential delayed rollout, I mean, I'll be clear, if we're doing fully remote learning, I am hard pressed to not have every student have access to a computer on the first day that school starts. So what needs to happen there to make it happen, I don't know, but I do think that is a priority we have to push for, because I don't know what a child does if they have 2 weeks without a computer in a fully remote environment. So I guess that's my concern of that. So I see that as a very top priority to figure out. If there's backup, if there's anything we can do to cover it for a period of time. I'm sort of not willing to leave it to fate, I guess is what I would be cautious doing that.
Yeah, and as you know, well, Sally Askman wasn't able to be here tonight. She has been in direct connection and communication with them multiple times per week regarding this issue. And so she's providing that urgency for them as well. Part of what Microsoft is also doing is imaging the machines for us. So the moment we get the machine, it is ready to go on our network. And so the turnaround time, once we get it in hand, is also quicker than a typical delivery where we would have to receive the device, image it ourselves, and then turn it around. But we completely agree with your urgency, and that's why we're continuing to engage.
So I just like keep us informed, just so, you know, what's the backup plan if they don't come through?
Director Stewart?
Just want to say again, welcome also for us. In your, as you look at all the operations that you're doing with getting the laptops back in hand, and also, to be quite frank, Price having to scrub some throughout the semester, you should be aware that a few years ago we had a trial project in which Sally Askman and I believe it was Shannon Bakken from Special Services had created a 12-step program to teach our special needs students how to scrub a computer. And it was so good that, to be quite frank, within an hour, the student that was trying it had down about 6 steps. So if you're in need of that, I think that can be dusted off the shelf, and we could have some really great experience for some of our special needs students.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Just want you to have that in your hip.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry. I have a question, or a clarifying question I have. I just wasn't following. So if we do not receive these computers from Microsoft before the start of the academic year, do we have other computers? I mean, is there risk that we will not be able to provide every student who needs one a machine?
I do not think so. We have we've been very resourceful with keeping what would normally be surplus this year in stock, so we could use those. And we also have some other they're related to other programs, but we have spares at each one of our schools that will cover the difference as well. So I think we're in a good place.
Okay, good. That makes me feel more comfortable. You know, it's you know, if we're going completely remote and we're saying that we want to provide equitable instruction, you know, a threshold requirement for that is that every student has access to the tools to learn. So I'm glad to hear that we've thought ahead and we're taking steps to make sure that's the case. Also, nice to meet you as well.
Likewise. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, great.
Okay, and we have one more part of our return to school update, and Associate Superintendent Matt Gillingham will join us. Okay, and so let me Let me just remind the board, this does tie to operational expectation 10. 10.1 is maintain a collaborative school culture that ensures high expectations and success for all children in all classrooms through equitable and aligned systems and supports. So when we think about the mental health supports and that system that is there to provide and support our students, whether they're remote or in person, we are continuing to work on that, as the board knows, and Matt will provide an update in that regard.
All right. Thank you very much. Happy to share some updates in terms of where we're at in transitioning our behavioral health supports for students. And as Dr. Holman mentioned, our behavioral health supports are part of a larger system of supports and thinking about the well-being of our students. In fact, we were talking within our division today about all of the protective and proactive aspects of student life that help support students, and a lot of those things are, in a remote environment, are much more challenging. And so we're continuing to look at how do we create opportunities for students, student engagement and activities and affinity groups and socialization and things that support student well-being in general. And we're also working with the school leaders around thinking about how do we adapt social emotional learning as part of kind of a foundational work school-wide at each level. So there's work that's going on thinking about that system supports at kind of this universal level, but today I'm going to talk more about kind of the intervention level. And you'll see I'm going to just highlight some things at each level of schooling and some of the in-person supports that we've had in place and how we're looking at transitioning that to remote supports. And one of the things that we are talking about and looking at, as well as even if we're in a remote environment, we're working with our community partners to continue to look at how we might be able to provide some in-person supports during this time. And so as we continue to work on our abilities to slowly start to bring people back, because we know that that's just similar to teaching, providing in-person supports is one of the best ways for our students. And so we are going to be looking at how we can do that even when we're fully remote. Being fully remote does create some challenges in terms of getting students access to care. We work at the high school level with Evergreen Health and Youth Eastside Services. And during this spring, when we were remote, we were able to work with them to make a switch to telehealth office hours and providing remote services. One of the things that our experience in the spring was our students didn't necessarily access those services at the same level that they would have in person. However, we did see a demand from parents and parent engagement in wanting to connect and get supports for their children. So at all levels, one of the things that we're going to be looking at doing in remote services is how do we work with our partners to create opportunities to connect with parents so that parents have the opportunity to also access some supports for themselves on behalf of their students. We're also going to be looking at how do we do some additional communication out within our community so that if we're not necessarily seeing students on a regular basis, that our students and parents know how to access care, whether that's the crisis text line, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, Crisis Connections, so that they're not quite as reliant upon school-based staff, even though we're still going to be here for them. We have plans on a regular basis, so weekly or biweekly, to continue to have our counseling teams meet with our social workers around students of concern, so that we're helping to elevate and connect around that. And we're looking at how do we provide small group supports in a telehealth or remote environment. So. At the middle level, this is going to look very, very similar. So you can see we have a similar kind of level of in-person services. At the middle level, Youth Eastside Services provides the supports for our middle school students. And so we're working with them in terms of what the remote offerings will look like. We also had a really nice partnership in the spring with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation Balance of Mind group around parent webinars, and that's something that we're wanting to continue to partner and support as we move forward. At the elementary level, we have historically as a district put most of our intervention supports and services at the secondary level, partly because the level of acuity at the secondary level is higher, and some of the consequences are a little bit more immediate and severe with our older students. And so having that crisis response at the secondary level made sense. Also, our students are consolidated in fewer schools, so our ability to kind of scale up services at the secondary made sense. At the elementary, one of our challenges has been around providing behavioral health supports. We have more than 30 elementary schools. Our students also aren't of an age where they can provide consent to their own service or their own care, whereas at the secondary level, students are able to do that. So we've had some in-person supports, primarily through kind of referral to agencies. And with the additional resources that we're allocating towards behavioral health supports this year, we're looking at really investing them at the elementary level. We're currently in the process of requesting, excuse me just a second. Dr. Holman's gonna laugh because I still have a home phone. We're in the process of requesting proposals from some of our partner agencies around providing remote services, primarily focused on supporting parents and their children. We're doing parent support groups. And Shoreline Podiatry Department calling to remind. And so we'll be able to have that model set up here in the next couple of weeks and be ready to go at the start of the school year. During normal business hours at 206-401. Failure to do so may result in a
Do any of the board members have questions for Matt regarding our mental health supports and some of the work going on at each of the levels?
Director Stewart, you want to start?
Sure. I really appreciate the idea that you're not only having the services out there for the students, but also for the parents. Some of the negative voices on the idea of going remote for virtually all students has been on the issue of mental health at home for the students, for the parents, the idea of increased number of suicides, increased number of abuse cases, so forth. I'm glad to see that we recognize that we need to help both sets, if you will. The other thing, Matt, I keep hearing people talk about the statistic for students and mental health or emotional health problems with the remote learning. Have you seen any statistics at all that really corroborate what people are asserting, that these students are more vulnerable now, they're having more serious emotional problems? Are you just hearing the same assertions? I'm just hearing assertions. I'm not seeing stats. But if you have some, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
Not necessarily now. But
No, Director Stewart, no, I haven't seen anything that has come out that's kind of from a research perspective on that. We're certainly hearing all anecdotally a lot of the same things that the board is hearing, and I think there's a certain sense of logic to it, right? We're social social beings, and our students at each stage of their development, the social aspect is such an important part of of that development. And so we do lose something when we're not able to be together. And then when we think about a lot of the activities that bring joy or balance, or where students find meaning, and some of those things are harder to engage with. So I think some of the protective factors that are in place are not in place in the same way. So we are looking at how do we do a better job of trying to recreate some of those protective factors, and to try to help balance that out. I think the other thing too is thinking about our staff. So with us moving to some synchronous instruction, so that our staff, will be able to see students on a regular basis, that should also help where we're having those regular connections. And that's going to be something that we'll have to be continuing to monitor and adjust throughout this time period, and adjust to also what the conditions are in our community.
Matt, one last question. With the idea of trying to have things as connected as possible, are we started exploring the ability for using teams for the clubs, whether it's the interact clubs or the key clubs, that sort of thing, to be able to meet electronically?
Yeah, so John Applegate, he's our Director of Athletics and Activities, and he's been working a lot with our activity coordinators to look at how do we continue to have the kind of the student life experiences, even if that's remotely. We also have Gloria Henderson, our Director of Equity, Opportunity, Inclusion, has been running a lot of student groups, affinity groups, that we've been doing remotely over the summer. And so looking at doing that, and then I think also is that as we have a gradual return to being physically in place, that we may be able to return, in some small group activities as well. And so that'll be something that we'll be looking at, because that's an important part of growing up and being a student as well.
Sure. Just in case you need some test models, if you will, I know that the Redmond Kiwanis and the Sammamish Rotarians would love to help you out if you need to try and test, take it out for a test run.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I think I'm next here, so I'm just going to jump in. Have we been speaking with the Schools Foundation over the summer to see if that partnership, they're interested in continuing that partnership on mental well-being, et cetera?
Yeah, so Johnny Fu, who's our Director of Student Services, has been in regular consultation with the Balance of Mind group, and looking at how we might be able to move forward. So we don't have anything definitive yet. I think what we did learn through the spring was that experience was something that was kind of steadily gained traction amongst parents. And so that's one of the reasons why we have really started to push with our community partners around focusing on parents, because what we were seeing is that students weren't necessarily accessing services, but there was definitely a demand from parents. So how do we connect and support them on behalf of their student?
Right. I actually participated in a couple of the Balance in Mind offerings online, and it was really helpful as a parent. It was also helpful to hear other concerns that other parents have and their perspectives. So I think there's a lot to be gained in all ways. And then my other question is, it's great that we're going to be doing some synchronous so that teachers hopefully have an eye on at least a face of a student here and there. It wouldn't tell me, unfortunately there's bruising, there's all these other things that might be abuse that's happening. Is there, how would a student, say that's old enough to have a phone, how would they know who to reach out to if they were having trouble at home, if they were being abused at home? Do we have resources available?
Yeah, our community has a couple of resources. So the Crisis Connections is one of them, and the Crisis Text Line is another one that for students are good accessible resources. The text line is something that's actually is really accessible for students. And those are organizations within our community that can then help connect people with the right type of care or supports, or if they're in the midst of a crisis, kind of keep them talking, keep them on the line. So we're going to have to look at doing a lot of times we talk with students face to face about these things, and we're going to need to be doing some broader campaigns using our media platforms to be able to make sure that those resources are out in the community.
Yeah, my concern is, A, I wouldn't want to cause a situation to be worse at home, but B, how do the students even know who to call if they need help, or, a number they could text, or, it's kind of a big gray area for students. And I wish there was more that we could do to help in this area, and that information was more accessible to them without, say, a parent seeing that it's accessible and becoming upset and then worsening a situation at home.
Yeah.
It's a balance that I don't know how to keep. I'm counting on somebody smarter than me to do it.
Definitely. Director Fu and I today had that same conversation around, the use of like telehealth and accessing supports or universal screeners or anything like that, thinking through all of the ramifications and trying to anticipate the ways that things potentially could go wrong, because that's what we want to avoid and prevent against. So that said, we'll continue to provide resources and adjust those resources. Our community partners have been great about adapting as well, and making those things available for students as best we can.
So are you saying that students currently already have access to some ways to get help?
Yeah, well, we've actually, so at the secondary level, our partners started providing telehealth services this spring. And right. What will be the addition for us really going into this year is we'll be refining that at the secondary level, but is really the addition of supports at the elementary level, which is, is going to be more focused on the parents because given the developmental age of the students, and their students that age aren't able to access care individually.
And I do realize we did telehealth, and I think it was a great thing to get going in the spring. I just don't know that a person who's in an abusive situation, a minor, would set up a telehealth appointment because it leaves a trail somewhere. It's on your computer, it's on your phone, and who pays for those things? The people in your house pay for those things. So, do you have any kind of an idea of when you might be discussing this topic again with Johnny and community partners?
Well, he's working with those community partners on a daily basis. And that's one of the reasons too, as we develop our protocols to be able to return people into buildings, that we also want to have some in-person services. Now there's drawbacks to that because we would require a student to physically come to school. But that if we have some blended options for care and supports, then we just want to create opportunities for students to be able to access care in the way that works for them.
Okay, we would love to hear your updates as you go about. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm good. Anyone else? Thanks, Matt. Dr. Holman, I believe that concludes the update. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you. That does conclude our update for fall planning. And thank you for the team for putting that information together, and we'll continue to bring updates to the board throughout August as well.
Okay, the last item on the non-consent agenda is an update on the City of Kirkland. Dr. Holman, could you provide us with that update?
Yeah, you cut out for me right at City of, and so I'll just finish that. City of Kirkland School Resource Officer Task Force recommendations and SRO legislation. Here tonight, back is Associate Superintendent Matt Livingston. We met with the board in study session 2 weeks ago to do an overview and be able to answer some questions of the board. We had some community partners there to answer some questions. Tonight is a little bit more of a brief version, but really just to provide the information regarding the task force recommendations and legislation that the district is required to follow moving forward. So Matt, if you want to share your screen, I will talk about the policy connection and you can take it from there. Great. And so when I think about the policy connection here, there's two kind of distinct places where I think this work really lines up with the board's policies, and that's operational expectation 9, communication and engagement with the community. 9.1 is assuring the timely flow of information, appropriate input, and strategic two-way communication between the district and its communities to build understanding and support the district efforts. When you think about the task force work, that was made up of a number of stakeholders in reviewing this program. And then 9.2 is about maintaining family engagement that recognize the developmental needs of our diverse students and ensure active participation of students and families. And then operational expectation 10 is about the learning environment and treatment of students. And so really this task force recommendations, this legislation is about ensuring that when an SRO program is in place, that it is in place in a manner that is conducive to students being successful. With that, I'll hand it over to Matt to present the recommendations and legislation.
All right, okay, thank you, Dr. Holman. So just briefly to kind of center us, when we're talking about a school resource officer, we're talking about a commissioned law enforcement officer. And so in our school district, we have school resource officers from the Kirkland Police Department, Redmond Police Department, from Sammamish PD, and from King County Sheriff's Department. And they are working in schools to address crime, any criminal issues that's affecting or occurring in and around K-12 schools. And the focus of school resource officers is to keep students out of the criminal justice system when possible, and to defer to school administrators when there's an issue that's more appropriately handled within the educational system. So I'm going to just kind of highlight for the board the recommendations from the Kirkland School Resource Officer Task Force. The School Resource Officer Task Force came into being as a result of a City of Kirkland resolution back at the end of 2018. And it authorized the city to work with the school district and engage members of the community to have a conversation about the School Resource Officer program. And the kind of the scope of that task force was to review national best practices compared to the current school resource officer program, and to make recommendations for the improvement of that program. The membership, there was quite a number of community members as well as staff members both from Kirkland and Lake Washington School District. Early on, we actually recognized as a group that there needed to be more community members, and so the group was expanded to have a greater community voice. The task force met 7 times. This all occurred between last June and concluded this past January. Additionally, the City of Kirkland conducted additional interviews from parents and representatives from advocacy organizations as the task force was kind of nearing its completion. So the task force had really kind of 3 groups of recommendations. So one of those was this recognition around authorizing documents. And because the school resource officer program with Lake Washington School District and with the Kirkland PD has evolved, there was a discovery that some of the different kind of guiding documents between the Kirkland and Lake Washington kind of reflected the different times at which they were drafted. And so the task force is recommending that those documents are aligned so that they have a consistent purpose, statement, rules, and responsibility, making it really clear that the purpose of the school resource officer program is to keep students out of the criminal justice system. And recognizing, there was also recognition that there, as a result of some recent legislation that was passed, that there'd be some additional guiding documents that we'd want to incorporate into that. Some generalized recommendations from the committee was to create proactive communication materials to better introduce the school resource program to the community, including potentially impacted community members. And so that having school resource officers meet with affinity groups, formalizing community feedback requirement, which is one of the new requirements of the new legislation, to explore ways for school resource officers to be provided with information on student behavior intervention plans. This is particularly thinking about students that have specific needs, so that school resource officers are prepared to interact with students and not misinterpret those students' behaviors. Explore ways to regularly collect and report relevant data and look at that to see whether there are disparate negative impacts for particular groups of students, and evaluating additional mechanisms for feedback, such as a 360 evaluation tool. The School Resource Officer Task Force also looked at school resource officer experience and training. So there was a recognition that the training requirements would need to be updated to be current with the new law, to maintain current expectation of NASRO training, that's the National School Resource Officer Organization, to ensure that school resource officers have training on how to refer students to counseling or other services. The City of Kirkland has a hiring requirement of minimum of 2 years experience. And so the task force recommended to maintain that, but additionally, the task force recommended make a change in the job description to indicate a demonstrated ability with respect to interactions with youth, and to continue emphasizing retention of school resource officers. Currently in Kirkland, that's a 5-year assignment for officers. One of the things that the task force, as we were kind of nearing the end of our work, we began looking at, there was a new House Bill 1216, which created some new requirements. And so we'll provide an overview of that to the board. These will be things that we'll be implementing this year. And there's, I believe, just kind of 4 key areas of this new legislation. So one of them is that there will be an annual review of the school resource officer agreement and policy. And so as a school district, we'll need to adopt a policy. That review will need to involve parents, students, and community members. The School Resource Officer Task Force with the City of Kirkland was a nice model, and one that we will look to replicate. We'll need to do that with each of our partner and municipal agencies. And so it'll be a little bit broader than what we engaged in with Kirkland, but that was a good model for us to build from. Having a clear statement regarding the duties and responsibilities, particularly around behavior and discipline. And so really having clear line that school resource officers are not to become involved in formal school discipline situations that are the responsibility of a school administrator. Looking at that there are multiple roles for school resource officers, and looking at that how a school resource officer knows when to informally act with students versus when to enforce the law. And making sure that our policy is clear to the circumstances under which school staff, such as teachers and administrators, may ask an officer to intervene with a student. The HB 1216 also really specifies the training that school resource officers need to have. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'm going to highlight a few of them. The working with youth, both the youth, child, and adolescent development, as well as trauma-informed approaches to working with youth, as well as recognizing and responding to youth mental health issues are called out as areas that require specific training. Working on the rights of students with disabilities and understanding the relationship of disability to behavior. Also looking at disparities for the use of force and arrest in children, so de-escalation techniques, understanding state law regarding restraint and isolation, and engaging in bias-free policing and cultural competency, including best practices for interacting with students from different backgrounds, as well as FERPA, which is the student privacy rights. Another key aspect of HB 1216 that I want to call out is that we as a district will need to annually collect data and report that data as far as the calls for law enforcement service and the outcome of each call, student arrest and referral, and we'll need to disaggregate those items by school, offense type, race, gender, age, and whether the student has an IEP or a 504 plan. And so this will require a little bit of work for us to, with our school resource officers and our police agency partners, to ensure that we've got a good data system set up, particularly thinking about how we're protecting the privacy of students as we're collecting this data. And finally, the HB 1216 calls for a process for families to file complaints, both with the school and the local law enforcement agency, and calling out a process for investigating and responding to those complaints. So that'll be something that we'll be working on, and will be something that we'll be working on in partnership with the community stakeholder group that will form as part of that annual review. So that's just a brief update on both the task force recommendations as well as HB 1216. I'm happy to take any questions from the board if there are any.
Director Sage?
Yes, thank you. Will it be a building principal's job to, walk through with staff when it is appropriate to ask an SRO for involvement or help? how will staff gain information on when and when not to involve an SRO?
That's a great question. So we're actually moving to a system where we're using our learning management system to deliver a lot of our mandatory training remotely. That gives us actually a higher kind of degree of accountability in knowing that staff have gone through trainings and that certain information was conveyed. And so I would imagine that as part of this would be something that we'd move into a required training where we could have some accounting, that was part of the conversation, that staff was aware of kind of what the boundaries are, but also how to best use the school resource officer.
Okay, and maybe there's a check-in for understanding somewhere along that process.
Yes.
It occurs to me that it would be beneficial when we are gathering data, if we meaning the board or anybody in administration knew how often. Well, let me back up for a minute. If I am looking at in Power BI the data dashboard on exclusionary discipline, we have a ton of different categories here: tobacco, bullying, marijuana, all the way down to academic dishonesty and plagiarism. You know, how can as board members, can we have this broken out as to whether or not an SRO would even be involved in a situation like that?
Yeah, well, so I can give you some parameters that I think we'll be working with as we add this to our data collection. I don't want to get too specific until we actually have it designed, but so there are a couple of places that we can look at whether a school resource officer should be engaged, as well as whether a school resource officer was engaged. I think those are two different questions. In the student rights and responsibilities, there's a discipline matrix, and that discipline matrix identifies for different incidents what are possible or allowable actions under that. So, for example, if a student's in possession of marijuana, that would be something in which the school administrator would actually make a police contact with the school resource officer, primarily to hand over the contraband, because we don't want our school administrators having items. No, we don't. So, but like for an academic dishonesty, and I really hope I'm right on this, but it should be, is there should not be like a referral to a school resource officer as a potential action as a result of that incident. That would be completely inappropriate. Within the matrix, we've differentiated on level of severity, because even those terms can be all-encompassing, and so there can be a big difference when we think about kind of the level of severity. But so that would be one place, and that's certainly as we continue to look at and revise kind of our discipline guidance and policies to look to see one question is, are the right items listed as potential referrals if we, at least in the more kind of severe things, and are there things that really should never be that? And so making sure that policy is good is one thing. And then on the data piece, I think that the other question we're trying to get at is to what extent do kind of school disciplinary actions lead to police contact, and looking at what those outcomes. So what is that connection between the two?
And they have to make a report just talking to a student in the hallway, about anything they bring to them, do they have to make a report?
No, I don't believe that that informal kind of, would be, I think where certainly what our interest would be is, do we have disproportionality in terms of our referrals? I would have an interest of if we are saying like, here's our discipline, let's say it's within possession or, of marijuana. And if we have disproportionality in terms of the referral to a school resource officer from that would certainly be a cause for concern.
That would be great information to have. I guess that's where I'm trying to break it down to is, we can, first of all, I should say we've had very positive experiences with SROs, in particular with my current 17-year-old in special education who is 6 feet tall and doesn't always follow directions. We've had very positive interactions. I just want to make sure that what I'm hearing is as we go forward, we can build these things into the program and what we base our contract on.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I think that there's an alignment between the task force looking at best practices and saying if we're having school resource officers in our schools, how do we have some assurances that we're not further feeding into any disproportionality. And so I think as we're building out those data systems and looking at how we're capturing that, is trying to answer that question.
It sounds like there's a lot at the state level that's even now governing everything. Mm-hmm. So it should be easier going forward to put into place the accountability pieces.
Yes.
Even more so than we already have. Okay, thank you.
Director Stewart and Director Bleasner. Mark, if you're talking, you're on mute.
I said, I'm sorry, the hand was up by mistake from the last time. I apologize.
Director Bleasner, then do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I can. So thank you. Thank you to the task force and all the work that went into that and the recommendations and looking at those alignments across the board. So one question I have is the implementation of these. I didn't see a timeline as to when that annual review would occur, when that information would start to occur.
Yeah, so we are going to have some work to do to try to get all these, all the initial agreements. We're currently just trying to get them in alignment with the current law, and then we'll be building out the community team to be able to start reviewing it. Our data review, if we think about being on an annual cycle, would be something that we'd really be in best position to kind of analyze late summer, early fall on an annual basis, where we'd be able to look at what was from the previous year.
So knowing where the conversation is right now and a lot of issues and concerns, rightfully so, and around the area of equity and what's occurring within the system, the potential of disproportionality. We've had school resource officers for years within our schools. So I'm assuming retrospectively, a lot of that data would exist as capacity. You'd have to find it and pull it and match it, absolutely. But I do think, so that's just something I would encourage actually to be looking at, is what can we do with the data we already know? Because we do hear these concerns, and that's, the part of the task force was created due to the fact that there are concerns about having school officers in our schools. And that's just another underlying piece, and I think we need to be able to have that conversation, especially as we start to move to speaking about racial equity and what does it mean to have police officers in our schools. And so how do you work with that? So I think that's just, not even having baseline data makes it really hard to hold that conversation in a local context. And I think that's the challenge I keep having. And I know the data exists. It just has never been blended.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with blending the data is that the data is in two very different systems, and that those aren't necessarily connected. So what we can look at is, we can look at, on our end, we have student discipline data, and we could, as I was talking with Director Sage earlier, that we could look at, there are certain incidents that would be coded, so drug possession for one, that might reasonably prompt a referral to the school resource officer or school. And so we can look at what type of incidents might be reasonably generate that, but what we don't have is the connection with which ones actually then led to school contact with the school resource officer, or that piece of data is not something that we have within our system, which is why we have to build out that aspect. And I agree, it's makes it a little bit hard when you don't have that certainly as a baseline to talk about.
But if a police report was filed, if that had to happen, you could match a name.
Potentially, then they'd have to be willing to release the police reports to us. So you have some privacy issues in managing back and forth. That gets a little bit challenging. So
yep.
I don't have a way forward through that right now, and actually trying to, where as we've talked about building out the system, one of the things that we've talked about is actually tracking the data in our system, so that having to retroactively go and try to find every police report involving a student and figuring out whether that was generated as a result of a school referral versus through some other means.
Absolutely. The other piece, and so I appreciate the challenges and all, and that going forward, I just would hate to throw out our retrospective completely as well, because this has been an ongoing issue for years, honestly. So this is not new when it came forward. So the other component built here is we listened to the presentation 2 weeks ago and had the opportunity to speak to some task force members. One of the pieces was student voice, and where was student, so there's the piece of the data, but I'm still missing what's our students' perceptions within our schools of having school resource officers in that environment. And that to me would seem something that we could proceed forward on now as perception data, which is highly valuable, especially this task force did their recommendations prior to much of what occurred with the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as the other social racial justice components coming forward. I think there's a new context we have to think about, but I don't hear our students.
Yes, and actually getting that getting that information would be easier than doing a retrospective and trying to dig through quantitative data. And it also would tell a better picture because a lot of those interactions aren't necessarily recorded in some way that you quantify.
So that would be, I mean, as the board has talked about wanting to do an equity policy and really looking through these things and how do we look at our programs and policies with an equity lens and paying attention to these things, that's one of those pieces of data I feel like we're missing consistently across the board in a fashion that we can pull and therefore really inform what we do that provides our local context and our local students. So I guess I'd encourage whatever comes out of this. I didn't see that necessarily. And that's a piece a recommendation I'd like to see that goes forward sooner rather than later.
Okay, agreed.
Thanks,
Matt. One question Siri asked was around timelines. What's the timeline of the House bill for implementation? Like, what's the required timeline?
The time frame is that we need to implement this year.
Okay.
So all those pieces, the adoption of policy, alignment, establishing that community group, all of that work that I just spelled out, that's work that needs to be done this year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Director Sage, then Director Stewart, and then I have a question.
I want to express strong support, as Director Bleasner pointed out, for student voice. I think that that is very relevant to moving forward. And if I understand it in talks that I've had at the city level, you can request even the data on maybe a report had to be written, but it did not get followed up any further. It didn't go into the criminal justice system. And I think without knowing the name of the person, we would still be able to get what the situation was, the demographics of the student and so on. And I think that's worth pursuing and looking into as we go forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. One of the things that I've discussed a couple of times with some folks in Kirkland is the idea that the resource officer being a two-way street for not only the help of students, keeping them out of the judicial system, but also learning about our special needs community and the special situations and difficulties that presents to officers in the field and to those students, to be quite frank, or anyone that's already graduated. The idea of being able to, one, spend more of their time with special needs kids to get to know how, get to know them, get to know the idea of it, learn what works with kids. Granted, they're all different, but still you get at least a loose idea. And I think that I know that the city manager over in Kirkland he likes the idea of being able to then have those officers go back and tell his or her fellow officers, here's what we need to know about and how to interact with them. Because if, as Director Sage was saying, that the kids will not react well if they don't realize what's going on. And many of them, everyone says that you respond to a person in the uniform well. Many of them would know that uniform from a hole in the wall, and I think it's a necessary idea to have them have a continuity of exposure to those folks in the uniform, just for their own safety for the future, but also for a continuity for the officers to know that many of those will be carrying personal communications devices. That the kid may not be able to speak, but he or she will have a device around their neck that will maybe be able to tell them the name and the address and so forth. So it could be a two-way street of education of the students, but also of our law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, were some of the things, the benefits that were talked about within the task force, and I believe that conversation led to one of the recommendations, in particular, looking at how to ensure that school resource officers are prepared for supporting and understanding students with special needs, particularly in kind of crises. So yeah, that definitely was something that was discussed in the task force.
Especially the elopement issues with a lot of the kids.
Yes, yeah.
Thanks.
Director Carlson, do you have any questions or comments?
No, not really. I appreciate the thoughtfulness that's gone into this. I'm particularly interested in seeing the student voice department fleshed out in this coming year. The students are living on the front lines, and I want to know how they feel as a community about how to best work with these officers. I mean, I still have minor concerns about the fact that what they're doing is social work, so why don't we have social workers doing the social work? But at the same time, I know that we need to have SROs in the buildings, so if they're in the buildings, I would prefer to have them doing social work than criminal detective work. So anyway, that's where I'm at the moment.
Matt, you said that in our review site. Hang on, I'm gonna kill my video. You said that it would just, as part of our annual review cycle, this would be late summer, early fall. Does that mean we'll be hearing back from you this late summer, early fall, or is this something you're thinking may take a little longer for this year?
Well, I think that under HB 1216, that we're going to want to look at doing kind of an annual program report, probably in some fashion, to report back out on this. What I'm not certain on yet is terms of what type of data that we'll have, because as we're needing to build out the data collection system, as well as This is a school year in which we're starting the year remote, and so but I think where we can look at, we can certainly talk about what aspects have we of the requirements from the legislation and from the task force have been implemented. Hearing kind of the community and student engagement. So even if the quantitative data is not quite in a place where we may hope that it will eventually be, there certainly will be things that we'll be able to report back out on. Because as I said before, all of the items listed in the House Bill 1216, the expectation is that we get them foundationally in place this year.
Okay, thanks. Mark, your hand's still up. Did you have something else? Mark, did you have anything else to add?
Well, it's not to add, but to ask. Matt, as we look beyond just the Kirkland aspect of the SROs, and we look to broadening out the uniformity, if you will, of the SROs throughout the entire district. The way that Kirkland has structured its study, can we share that and share that with the other municipalities within our district as well as the county, so we can have make sure that when we're comparing stats or we're comparing guidelines, we're going apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I know that each of the communities have their own human rights commissions, but also there's an outreach from the Human Rights Commission for Redmond. There's a committee composed of several parents of ours as well as civic leaders. So if we could have some way of being able to take that study and hopefully then make sure that all the data is collected in the same manner, we can make sure that we're not having something that can't be compared from East Lake to Juanita to Lake Washington to Redmond High.
Yes. So Director Stewart, certainly, I mean, the report's publicly available and we will be sharing it. And it certainly is something that all the staff, from Lake Washington School District was in support of the task force recommendations. I think, again, coming back to the data collection.
I would just encourage I would like to see us encourage the other municipalities to go the same route if possible, so we can have a uniformity.
Yeah, I think if we take the lead on the data collection, which that actually gives us the best avenue to be able to disaggregate the data by some of the indicators that are required under law. It would not be would be ones that only the school district would have access to, and so want to make that connection to our discipline. So that'll be something that we'll be working into our agreements with each of the agencies.
Great, thank you.
And Matt, isn't it true that we've had a consistent contract with all four agencies for many years with the same language, really, to direct the program to be a district program, not an agency by agency program? So that is something the cities and county are used to doing when working with Lake Washington in our SRO program.
Yes, that's correct, John.
Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Okay. The next item on our agenda is the superintendent report. Dr. Holman, do you have a superintendent report for this evening?
Yes, I do. Let me go ahead and pull that up. And so, given the decision that that we made as a district to go fully remote last week, I just wanted to provide clarity around the decision in relation to apportionment, because I think that's a very key piece to all of this. Because when we think about moving to a fully remote program, and with the goal of getting students back into our schools this year for in-person learning, one of the questions that continually arises is, will the state continue to fund school districts? And so I just want to walk through a little bit of the information for why I believe the rationale is very strong for why OSPI will support this decision. And so, one of the questions is, how are state and local agencies supporting our efforts to reopen school in the fall? One is that many agencies continue to point to local decision-making as the authority for how and when schools will reopen, what it will look like. They've provided requirements for how students are to learn when they're in person. They've also provided requirements for how students are to learn when they are remotely. OSPI refers to remote learning this year as Remote Learning 2.0, and talks about the need to increase student access, increase student ability to learn in that remote environment. I think another question is, how aren't state and local agencies supporting our efforts to reopen schools in the fall? I think one thing is limited coherence between our agencies. I know our agencies are attempting to work with one another, yet at the end of the day, it continues to be agency by agency rolling out information to districts. There's no consistency in referencing data. And the reason I call that out is, if we're to make decisions, local decisions that we're the authority for, there really isn't a consistent set of data that is being used across all of the agencies that actually have the authority to direct the school district. And there really has been no support for developing key metrics for school districts to evaluate conditions for reopening. And I say key metrics because this isn't a decision to take lightly. This isn't a decision to make on a whim. The decision to move to remote learning was a very large decision for our families, for our students, and had to be made very cognizant of what are the data points that we're going to use to make that decision. And so I want to point to the OSPI guidance that we received in June and pulled this statement out. And Superintendent Reichdahl says that every district will need an alternative plan to return to full continuous remote learning in the event that you cannot open, or a local health authority or the governor mandates a short or long-term closure. And I want to key in on a key phrase here for me, and that says, you cannot open. And so last Thursday, we provided the rationale for why, as a district, we cannot open for full in-person learning in the fall, why we were not moving towards a hybrid schedule for our general education classes, and why we would be doing a full remote model. We determined that we could not open, and I think the OSPI guidance allows us to make that decision. And so, as you saw on Thursday night, I just want to talk a little bit about the metrics that we used to make that determination. We did use the King County dashboard. They have key indicators of COVID-19 activity, which provide us with a very good data set to see, is our county in alignment with where health officials believe we should be in a number of different areas. A key metric that reports and models continue to point to is transmission rate, and making sure that that is below 1, because we know if it's over that 1.0 mark, that us reopening school would increase the rate of transmission. We also know that to reopen schools successfully, that we need rapid testing and quality contact tracing to be in place and available. When you think about the idea of students returning to school and us just needing to close back down because that rapid testing and quality contact tracing isn't there, then it puts us into that cycle of students being put back and forth between remote learning and in-person learning. And that is one of the reasons that we actually did decide to do full remote. And then we also want to continue to look at our learning data for our students as we go through our remote learning, to continue to evaluate that, because that also needs to be part of the conversation as we talk about moving back to in-person learning. And so with that, my conclusion is that our state and local agencies have provided guidance and stated the remaining decisions should be made locally. Superintendent Reichtel clearly stated that districts should be prepared for remote learning if you cannot open. The only logical conclusion I can arrive at, since guidance for determining when we open has not been provided, that Lake Washington School District is responsible for determining whether we can reopen school for in-person learning in the fall. Given our clearly defined metrics for making this decision, it is my professional belief and opinion that we have complied with OSPI's guidance for reopening school in the fall, and thus expect full apportionment so we can continue to provide the highest level of service to our students while urgently preparing for in-person learning when conditions align with Lake Washington School District's stated metrics. And I provide that report to the board because I think it's important for all of us to understand some of the why of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and as we know, apportionment is critically important because while we may be starting in a closure, we know that we need to have staff in place as we move to reopening our school district for in-person learning. And that is my superintendent's report.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. Director Carlson, I see you have a hand raised.
So thanks for the update. I've got a bigger picture question because I think this is very good, but you're dead right about the lack of coordination among agencies. And on our side, how well are you able to coordinate with the other Puget Sound ESD SUPs on these are going to be the consistent criteria that we're going to use to reopen? Have you been able to do anything of that sort?
So every Wednesday we have a regional call with all of the superintendents in the region. I'm in contact with our East Side superintendents. We actually have a weekly meeting as well. Last week you saw a number of South Sound school districts move to full closure. Really the metric they identified was kind of the rate per 100,000 in their area was spiking and continuing to escalate. That wasn't a decision made by all superintendents, but that was the metric that they identified. I have shared the metrics that we are using with our regional superintendents here, but as far as a consistent approach that every school district is using, that has not been reached.
Yeah, okay, just if we can't get the other side to unify, maybe we can unify our side.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Holman.
Yep.
The next item on our agenda tonight is board member comments. Do any board members have any comments? Okay, I do. It's a question for staff. Well, I guess, Director Bleaser, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. I just noticed your hand was raised. Will you permit me to make my comment first? I'll do that anyway.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Holman, I had raised to you before, and I've heard from a few community members the idea of whether it's possible that if we're going to be remote for the near future for our board meetings, whether it's possible to take live public comment via either, I guess it would have to be through this platform. And I think that's something if we want to do, we need to be in alignment. That's something the board wants to do, because that'd be a new practice. And I guess the question would be, is that even technologically feasible? I just wanted to throw that out there both for staff, so we can gauge whether that is something that's feasible, and for the board to hear whether that's something, if that's something we would be interested in doing.
And so to answer the question of is it feasible? Yes, it is feasible. We would just need to provide those individuals with access to this same format that we all have for participation. And so those people would come into the meeting, they would provide their comment, and then they would leave the meeting. And so yes, it is technically possible.
Okay, that's a little cumbersome. Okay. Okay. Director Bleasner?
And I'll just follow up. I actually have a note as I was writing that said we need to start considering how to do in-person public comment as this is going on much longer. So I think it's probably the right step to take is what I would say. And the right way to do it, be it through a called in, but having people be able to use their own voice to have their comments said. I think that is an important thing to be providing. Be it through videotape. Can they videotape a 3-minute public comment and can we show that? I don't know, I know Kirkland is doing some things and other places are dealing. So yes, I would support that. And I think Director Sage might have more to say on that. And if so, I'd rather do that and I will do a different comment later so we don't go off topics. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I have been tuning into different city council meetings, and City of Kirkland did 3 things at one of their recent meetings. They had somebody submit a 3-minute video. They had callers phone in, and they did have a couple of letters read. No, not letters, voicemails. So apparently people called earlier and left a voicemail, timed it to 3 minutes, and those voicemails were played. I would also support having more live opportunities for public comment. I also am trying to balance that, okay, if we get an hour and a half of public comment, how do we balance everything so that we can still hold a meeting and do the business that we need to do and receive the updates that we need to? So I think that we do need to adhere to a timeline on public comment and probably need to look through it as, okay, this is the same sentiment, here's a diverging viewpoint.
Director Bleasner, do you want to finish your thoughts?
So my next thought, so on a different point from this actually, so I just wanted to make sure that that was sort of wrapped where it needed to be, is around working forward. And I just want to make sure on our work plan, so as I put out to the board, as we spoke, we've had a lot around equity and issues and lots of different pieces coming out. And the piece on our equity policy that we haven't ever followed through completely, we've started it, but we haven't finalized that out. I just want to ensure that we're in agreement that that should be on the work plan, that will be a focus for the next year, and that we build that out. I believe we have, but we haven't quite built out the components as strongly as I would like to see, I guess. And I'm hoping that that is something we can do. So I'm sort of putting that forward as, I think it's a priority that we need to take on. We weren't able to do board training that we had planned to do around equity and racial equity. That sort of fell through. So how do we get that onto the agenda in this remote environment? I don't believe we can wait till we have capacity for in-person. So I guess that's my comment. I'd like to see that get made a priority. I don't know how it gets put on and the way we need it to go. I know pieces are. I'd like to be able to plan out a whole plan for what that year looks like, in which to at the end have a product of that has community engagement and everything around that equity policy concept.
I agree. That sounds good.
Then we put it in your hands, President.
All right. Okay. And I guess just to, it sounded like there was agreement on potentially on going forward with live public comment in some fashion. So I'll work with staff and loop back with the board before our next meeting to see if we're going to be able to do that. But with the goal of trying to have that in place for our next meeting. Okay. Any other board member comment?
Nope.
I actually have one more comment. So there are some of the coordinations, so Director Carlson spoke to this. We do have the East Side directors are actually meeting one or two of us from each board, the 5. So just to get an idea, to say what's happening and sharing those things that are happening, to be able to speak to that alignment and those sorts of things, just to be able to keep that conversation there as well. So that's been also very helpful in being able to have that bigger picture. So we had the opportunity to speak with the health department. King County Public Health Director Patty Hayes came, so that was very helpful in being able to hold that conversation of some of the needs on this side, similar to what superintendents are saying, but it's just coming from another voice as well to help support that as a common voice. So that's just another piece of coordination that's occurring around the reopening and how to work with this within a pandemic situation.
And I will say that a lot of that work that's being done and the sharing is invaluable to me as a board member, trying to figure out how we navigate through this sort of uncharted territory of beginning remote. So it's been very helpful, as have the public health meetings.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Board meetings in August and September may be adjusted pending changes in the governor's orders regarding the Open Public Meetings Act. Information will be updated on the district's website as soon as this information is known. Currently, the board meetings for August are scheduled to be in person on August 10th at the Hughes Room at the Resource Center at 5 p.m. for the study session and 7 p.m. In the boardroom for the board meeting. And then August 24th, the same times for the meetings in the same locations. I anticipate we will receive some further guidance from the governor in the coming days, and those may be adjusted, and that information will be posted to our website. Okay, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn this July 27th board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It is moved by Director Sage and seconded by Director Carlson that we adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 All are in favor, so the motion carries and the meeting is adjourned. And we now have a study session. We have a set board members. We have a separate link for those watching. That will be you will be able to view that the same manner you're viewing this meeting. It's 7:43. There's complete chaos going on in my house around me. So can we take about a 10-minute break for me to help my wife, and then we'll do the study session at
8 o'clock.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, 7:53.
See you soon.
Call in a few minutes.